You're on a hike. Your dog spots a puddle that looks, to put it generously, like a crime scene, brown, stagnant, with something unidentifiable floating in it, and before you can react, they've got their whole face in it, drinking like it's the finest water on earth. You panic a little, mentally preparing for a vet visit, and then nothing happens. No vomiting, no illness, no visible consequence at all. They just trot off, completely fine, while you're standing there genuinely confused about how that's possible. Because if you drank from that same puddle, you'd very likely be spending the next several days in a considerably worse relationship with your own bathroom. This isn't luck, and it isn't just a dog being tough. There's a real, genuinely fascinating set of biological reasons why dogs can drink water that would put a human in the hospital. And once you actually understand the mechanisms involved, it becomes one of those facts that quietly changes how you see an animal you probably assumed you already understood completely. Let's start with the most immediate line of defense, because it begins before the water even gets past the mouth. Dog saliva contains significantly higher concentrations of certain antimicrobial compounds than human saliva does, including an enzyme called lysozyme, which works by breaking down the cell walls of many types of bacteria on contact. Humans have lysozyme in their saliva too. It's not some exotic dog-only chemical. But research comparing saliva composition across species has found meaningfully higher concentrations and broader antibacterial activity in dogs, giving them a genuine first-pass defense against at least some of the bacterial content in questionable water before it's even fully swallowed. This is part of why the old folk wisdom about a dog's mouth being cleaner than a human's mouth carries at least a partial grain of truth, even though the full claim is more complicated and, in other specific ways, actually false, since dog mouths also carry their own distinct set of bacteria that would be genuinely bad news for a human. But specifically against certain pathogens present in dirty water, that saliva is doing real, measurable work. Here's where things get genuinely interesting, because the mouth is really just the opening act. The main event happens in a place most people never think about at all, the dog's stomach, and specifically, how acidic it actually is. Human stomach acid typically sits at a pH somewhere around 1.5 to 3.5, which is already quite acidic enough to handle a reasonable amount of bacterial contamination in food and water under normal circumstances. Dog stomach acid, by contrast, has been measured in some studies at a considerably lower, more acidic pH, in some cases dropping below 1, occasionally cited in veterinary and comparative physiology literature as approaching pH levels closer to battery acid than anything you'd associate with a mammal's digestive system. That's not a small difference. pH is measured on a logarithmic scale, meaning each single step down represents a tenfold increase in actual acidity, not a simple linear increase. A dog's stomach operating at a pH meaningfully below a human's isn't just a bit stronger. It can represent an environment dramatically, exponentially more hostile to the bacteria, parasites, and other pathogens that would otherwise survive the trip through a less acidic human stomach and go on to cause serious illness. Why would a dog need stomach acid that intense in the first place? Because it seems like a strange feature to evolve just for the occasional questionable puddle. The answer connects directly back to where dogs actually came from. Dogs descend from wolves, and wolves are opportunistic carnivores and scavengers, animals that regularly consume raw meat, sometimes meat from carcasses that have already been sitting for a while, along with bone, and occasionally, food sources that have been handled or contaminated in ways that would represent a serious bacterial risk to almost any other mammal. An extremely acidic stomach wasn't specifically evolved to handle dirty puddle water. It evolved to handle exactly the kind of bacterially risky diet a wild scavenging carnivore actually eats on a regular basis, breaking down raw meat efficiently and neutralizing a meaningful percentage of the dangerous bacteria that comes along with it, including things like salmonella and certain strains of E. coli that would represent genuine medical emergencies for a human eating the same contaminated food. The dirty puddle water tolerance isn't the main feature. It's a convenient side effect of a digestive system built for something considerably more extreme. There's a second piece of this puzzle worth understanding, because stomach acid alone doesn't explain the full picture, and it involves something called gut microbiome composition, essentially the specific community of bacteria that lives inside a dog's digestive tract and helps process food and defend against harmful invaders. Research comparing canine and human gut microbiomes has found meaningful differences in composition, including some evidence that dogs maintain a gut bacterial community that's more resilient to disruption from ingesting new, unfamiliar bacterial strains, compared to the considerably more easily disrupted human gut microbiome. Think of it as an established home team advantage. A dog's existing gut bacteria are, to a meaningful degree, better equipped to competitively resist a small invading population of new bacteria from a contaminated water source, crowding it out and limiting its ability to establish itself and cause actual illness, compared to the human gut, which tends to be considerably more easily thrown off balance by unfamiliar bacterial exposure. Now, before this starts sounding like dogs have some kind of magical, bulletproof immune system that makes contaminated water completely harmless, it's genuinely important to be honest about the limits of all of this. Because that's absolutely not the case, and treating it that way could actually put a dog at real risk. Dogs absolutely can and do get sick from contaminated water, and veterinarians see cases of this regularly. Giardia, a parasite commonly found in contaminated natural water sources, causes genuine, sometimes serious illness in dogs just as it does in humans, and dogs are not immune to it despite everything we've just covered about acidic stomachs and antimicrobial saliva. Leptospirosis, a bacterial infection specifically associated with contaminated water, particularly water that's been in contact with the urine of infected wildlife, is a genuinely serious and in some cases fatal disease in dogs, common enough that many veterinarians specifically recommend vaccination against it for dogs that spend meaningful time around lakes, ponds, or other natural water sources. Certain toxic algae blooms, particularly blue-green algae that shows up in stagnant warm water during summer months, can be fatal to dogs within hours of exposure, and no amount of stomach acid or antimicrobial saliva provides any meaningful protection against that specific danger at all, because it's a toxin problem rather than a bacterial one. So the honest, complete picture looks like this. Dogs have a genuinely impressive, multi-layered biological toolkit, stronger antimicrobial saliva, dramatically more acidic stomach conditions inherited from their scavenging wolf ancestry, and a more resilient gut microbiome that collectively allows them to tolerate a level of bacterial contamination in water that would make most humans seriously ill. That's a real, well-documented biological advantage, not folklore or exaggeration. But it's a matter of degree, not invincibility, and it specifically addresses certain categories of bacterial risk while leaving dogs just as vulnerable, in some cases more vulnerable given typical outdoor exposure patterns, to parasites, specific bacterial diseases like leptospirosis, and toxin-based dangers like algae blooms that operate through completely different mechanisms their impressive digestive defenses simply weren't built to handle. There's something worth sitting with here. The fact that watching your dog casually drink from a puddle that would horrify you isn't actually witnessing some kind of animal toughness or indifference to danger. You're watching several 100,000 years of evolutionary pressure, built specifically around the messy, bacterially risky reality of being a wild scavenging carnivore, quietly doing exactly the job it was shaped to do, every single time, whether anyone's paying attention or not.